The portrait hung in the exact spot where there's used to be my face, now watching over their family gatherings. My eyes following every conversation. My presence undeniable in the home that was once their sanctuary. They thought excluding me from their precious family portrait would erase me from their legacy. They were wrong. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. My name is Jess Hartwell. I am 32 years old, and I live in Millbrook Heights, or rather I used to live there, before I bought the house that changed everything, before I learned that sometimes the most devastating revenge comes not from destroying what someone loves, but from becoming what they can never ignore. The story begins 3 years ago. On a Tuesday that felt like any other, I was arranging white peonies in the crystal vase Marcus had given me for our anniversary, when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister-in-law, Vivian. The message was simple. Family portrait session tomorrow at 2 p.m. Mom wants everyone there. Everyone. Such a loaded word in the Hartwell family. I had been married to Marcus for 2 years by then, together for 5. We'd weathered his mother Helena's initial disapproval, her passive-aggressive comments about my unconventional career as a freelance art consultant, and her thinly veiled disappointment that I wasn't the socialite princess she'd envisioned for her eldest son. But I thought we'd moved past all that. I thought I'd earned my place. The portrait session was scheduled at Helena's sprawling colonial home, the same house where Marcus had grown up, where family traditions were born and maintained with religious devotion. Professional photographer, coordinated outfits, the whole elaborate affair. I spent hours choosing the perfect dress, a navy blue wrap dress that Helena had once complimented, hoping it would signal my respect for the family's aesthetic preferences. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always did. Helena answered the door in her signature pearl necklace, and that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Jess, dear," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to recognize, polite but distant, like she was addressing a pleasant acquaintance rather than her son's wife. "Helena, thank you for including me in this," I replied, holding up the small gift bag I'd brought. "I got something for the photographer, those artisanal chocolates from that place downtown you mentioned loving." She accepted the bag with a nod that seemed more obligatory than grateful. How thoughtful. Everyone's in the living room. The living room was a shrine to Hartwell family history. Oil paintings of long-dead ancestors, crystal decanters that caught the afternoon light, and shelves lined with silver-framed photographs documenting decades of family milestones. Wedding photos, graduation pictures, holiday gatherings, a visual timeline of belonging that I'd always hoped to join officially. Marcus was adjusting his tie near the fireplace, looking uncomfortably formal in his charcoal suit. His younger sister Vivian sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her twin daughters Rebecca and Claire fidgeting in matching pink dresses. Helena's sister Margaret had driven up from the city, elegant as always in her designer blazer, while Helena's brother Robert stood by the window with his wife Patricia and their teenage son Daniel. 3 generations of Hartwells and me, Jess. Marcus brightened when he saw me, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "You look beautiful. That dress is perfect." "Thank you," I said, smoothing the fabric nervously. "Where should I stand? How are we arranging everyone?" Before Marcus could answer, Helena's voice cut through the warm family chatter. "Actually, Jess, we've decided to keep this portrait limited to blood relatives only. You understand, don't you? It's for the family legacy album." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my smile freeze on my face as the room fell silent. Blood relatives only. As if my 2 years of marriage, my 5 years of loving her son, my presence at every holiday and birthday celebration meant nothing. As if I was still just an outsider pretending to belong. "Mum," Marcus said sharply, and I could hear the warning in his voice. "Jess's family, she's my wife. Of course she's family. Darling. Helena replied smoothly, never losing that practiced smile. But this particular portrait is for the genealogy project Margaret has been working on. It's purely for documentation purposes. I'm sure Jess understands. I understood, all right. I understood that no matter how many family dinners I attended, no matter how many thoughtful gifts I brought, no matter how deeply I loved Marcus, I would always be seen as temporary, replaceable, someone who could be erased from their history with a simple decision about photographer arrangements. It's fine, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I'll just wait in the kitchen. Jess, Marcus started, but I was already backing toward the doorway. Really, it's fine, I repeated, forcing brightness into my tone. I'll help with the refreshments. I spent the next hour in Helena's pristine kitchen, listening to the muffled sounds of family bonding through the walls, the photographer's directions, the gentle corrections, the laughter as the children were coaxed into smiling, all of it happening without me. I arranged canapes on silver platters, checked the temperature of the wine, and pretended that my hands weren't shaking with humiliation. Through the kitchen window, I could see into the living room. The photographer had positioned them in a classic arrangement. Helena seated in the center, Marcus and Vivian flanking her, the children scattered around at their feet. Margaret and Robert standing behind. They looked perfect, complete. A family portrait that told the story of the Hartwell legacy, uninterrupted by inconvenient additions. Like daughters-in-law who might not fit the narrative, I watched Marcus laugh at something his mother said, watched him adjust his tie again, watched him exist in that space without me, as if my absence was natural, expected. He glanced toward the kitchen once, our eyes meeting through the glass, and I saw something flicker across his face, guilt, perhaps, or regret. But he didn't move to include me. He didn't excuse himself from the portrait to stand with his wife in the kitchen. He just turned back to his family and smiled for the camera. That moment crystallized something for me. Marcus loved me, I knew that. But when forced to choose between his mother's approval and his wife's dignity, he chose silence. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose to let me stand alone in the kitchen, while his family created memories without me. When the session ended, I rejoined them in the living room as if nothing had happened. I complimented the photographer's work, admired how handsome Marcus looked in his formal wear, and made appropriate small talk about the beautiful afternoon light. But something had shifted inside me. A door had closed, and I wasn't sure it could ever be opened again. The photographer, a kind woman named Sarah, whom I'd actually recommended to Helena, seemed uncomfortable with the tension she'd witnessed. I could take a few shots with everyone, she offered quietly. Different arrangements, you know. Sometimes families like options. That won't be necessary, Helena said firmly. We have exactly what we need. Sarah packed up her equipment with apologetic glances in my direction. I helped her carry some of the lighter cases to her car, grateful for the excuse to step outside and breathe. I'm sorry about that, she said once we were alone. I've been doing family portraits for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like that. It's complicated, I replied. Though it wasn't complicated at all. It was simple and devastating. I didn't belong. For what it's worth, Sarah said, you would have made the portrait more beautiful. You have a natural elegance that would have balanced the composition perfectly. I thanked her. But her kindness only made the rejection sting more. Even a stranger could see that I belonged in that family portrait. Everyone could see it except the family themselves. On the drive home, Marcus was unusually quiet. I watched the familiar streets of Millbrook Heights pass by, the manicured lawns and colonial houses that had become our neighborhood. Wondering if I would ever truly belong anywhere in this world Marcus had been born into. Finally, as we pulled into our driveway, he spoke. I'm sorry about today. Mom was way out of line. It's okay, I said automatically. The phrase I'd perfected over 2 years of marriage into the Hartwell family. No, it's not okay. You're my wife. You should have been. In that portrait, I wanted to agree with him. I wanted to be angry and righteous and demand that he fix this. But the hurt ran deeper than anger. It was a bone-deep understanding that I would never truly belong in the Hartwell family. No matter what Marcus believed or wanted, why didn't you say anything? I asked, why didn't you insist? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I guess I thought it would be easier to deal with it later. Privately. Easier for whom? For everyone. For you. I didn't want to make a scene. So instead you let your mother humiliate me in front of the entire family. She didn't mean to humiliate you. Didn't she? Marcus had no answer for that, and his silence told me everything I needed to know about his understanding of his mother's motivations. 3 weeks later, the portrait arrived. Helena had it professionally matted and framed in an ornate gold frame that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She hung it prominently in the living room, right above the mantelpiece where everyone could see it. The placement was perfect. It was the first thing anyone saw when entering the room, the focal point around which all conversation would naturally center. She posted it on social media with the caption, "4 generations of Hartwells so blessed to have this beautiful family legacy preserved forever." The comments poured in. Beautiful family. What a treasure. You must be so proud. The children look just like their grandmother. Such a distinguished family. Each heart emoji and compliment felt like a small knife twist, a reminder that I had been erased from their story so completely that no one even noticed my absence. My own mother called after seeing the post. "Honey, where are you in this picture?" "I wasn't included," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What do you mean you weren't included? You're married to Marcus." Helena wanted to keep it limited to blood relatives. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Then, "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You are family." Not according to Helena. What did Marcus say about this? He said she was wrong, but he didn't do anything about it. "Jess, honey, you can't let people treat you like this. You're worth more than that." But what could I do? Demand that Helena retake the portrait? Force my way into a family that clearly didn't want me there? The damage was done, and no amount of after-the-fact correction could undo the fundamental message that had been sent. Marcus saw the post and immediately called his mother. I could hear his raised voice from the kitchen, though I couldn't make out the words. The conversation went on for nearly an hour, with Marcus's tone alternating between frustration and pleading. When he hung up, he found me at the sink, scrubbing dishes with unnecessary violence. "She's taking it down," he said. "No, she's not. I told her she had to. It's disrespectful to you." To our marriage, I turned to face him, my hands still dripping soapy water. "Marcus, your mother doesn't see me as part of the family. Taking down one social media post isn't going to change that." "That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time she called me directly instead of going through you? When was the last time she asked about my work, my interests, my life beyond how it relates to you? When was the last time she included me in planning family events without me having to ask?" He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. We both knew I was right. "She did take it down," he said finally. "And she's going to post an apology." "I don't want an apology. I want to be treated like family." "You are family, not to her." The apology post appeared the next day. Earlier I shared a beautiful family portrait, but I realized I should have been more inclusive. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love and commitment. So grateful for all the wonderful people who are part of our family story. It was carefully worded, diplomatic and completely meaningless. She didn't mention me by name, didn't acknowledge the specific hurt she'd caused, and didn't commit to any different behavior in the future. It was the kind of non-apology that politicians give after scandals technically correct, but emotionally hollow. The comments on the apology post were mixed. Some people praised Helena for her grace and wisdom. Others asked pointed questions about what had happened to prompt such a statement. A few people seemed to understand exactly what the situation was, and offered veiled criticisms of exclusionary behavior. My friend Rachel, who had been at my wedding and knew the family dynamics, commented directly. Family portraits should include all family members, period. Her comment got dozens of likes and several supportive replies, which only made me feel more exposed and humiliated. The months that followed were a masterclass in subtle exclusion. Helena would plan family gatherings and forget to mention them to me directly. She'd send group texts to the kids that somehow never included my number. She'd reference inside jokes and family stories that predated my existence, laughing at memories I couldn't share while making no effort to include me in the current conversation. At Marcus's birthday dinner, she spent 20 minutes showing everyone photos from his childhood, telling elaborate stories about family vacations and holiday traditions. Each anecdote was punctuated with laughter and knowing looks between family members, while I sat at the table feeling like a tourist in someone else's life. Remember when Marcus was 8 and he tried to build that treehouse? Helena said, passing around a photo of a young Marcus covered in dirt and grinning triumphantly. He worked on it for weeks, so determined to finish it himself. He got the hammer stuck in the roof, Vivian added, giggling. Dad had to call the fire department. And Marcus cried because he thought he'd ruined Christmas, Margaret chimed in. He was convinced Santa wouldn't come if the house was broken. The laughter that followed was warm and intimate, the kind that comes from shared history and mutual understanding. I smiled politely, but I felt like I was watching a movie about people I didn't know. These stories weren't mine to share. These memories weren't mine to claim. And no amount of time or effort would give me access to the foundation of shared experience that bound this family together. The portrait became a symbol of everything I couldn't quite name. Every time I saw it during holiday dinners, birthday celebrations, casual visits, I felt that same punch of exclusion. There they all were, frozen in time, a complete family unit. And there I was, the wife who could be edited out of the picture. Without anyone even noticing, I began to withdraw. Not dramatically, not in a way that would invite confrontation. But gradually, I found excuses to skip some family events. I stopped bringing thoughtful gifts. I participated in conversations. Without really engaging, I became exactly what Helena had always seen me as. A polite outsider who happened to be married to her son. The change was subtle but noticeable. Where I had once arrived early to help with preparations, I now arrived precisely on time. Where I had once stayed late to help with cleanup, I now left with Marcus as soon as politeness allowed. Where I had once contributed actively to family discussions, I now offered minimal responses and let others carry the conversation. Marcus noticed, of course. He tried to address it, to bridge the gap between his mother and me. But he was fighting a battle he didn't fully understand. Helena was too sophisticated for outright cruelty. She was a master of the subtle slight, the overlooked invitation, the compliment that felt like criticism. "You look tired, dear. Are you taking care of yourself?" she'd say, her voice filled with concern that felt more like judgment. "What an interesting choice of career. So unconventional," she'd comment when someone asked about my work, making it sound like I'd chosen something vaguely embarrassing. "Marcus, you should eat more vegetables. Jess, you're so thin, you must not be much of a cook," she'd observed during dinner. managing to criticize both my appearance and my domestic skills in one seemingly innocent comment. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each slight was small enough to seem petty if I complained about it. Each exclusion was subtle enough to be explained away as an oversight. Each criticism was wrapped in enough false concern to make me look ungrateful if I objected. Helena had perfected the art of making me feel unwelcome while maintaining plausible deniability. The worst part was watching Marcus navigate these interactions. He loved his mother, that was clear, but he also loved me, and he was caught between two women who had fundamentally different visions of what his life should look like. Helena wanted him to be the son she'd raised, the heir to the Hartwell family traditions. I wanted him to be the man I'd married, someone who could create new traditions with me. Most of the time, he tried to play peacemaker. He'd deflect his mother's more pointed comments, change the subject when tensions arose, and later apologized to me privately for whatever had happened. But he never directly confronted the pattern of behavior. He never demanded that his mother treat me with respect. He never insisted that I be included in family decisions or traditions. I understood why. To some extent, Helena was formidable, and she had decades of experience in family manipulation. She knew exactly how to make Marcus feel guilty for challenging her while simultaneously making him feel responsible for keeping everyone happy. It was a masterful display of emotional control, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. Every time Marcus chose to avoid confrontation rather than defend me, every time he made excuses for his mother's behavior rather than addressing it directly, every time he asked me to be patient or give her time, I felt a little more alone. In my marriage, the breaking point came 8 months later. During Thanksgiving dinner, the family was gathered around Helena's dining room table, the portrait visible from my seat. When the conversation turned to holiday traditions, "I was thinking," Helena said, carving the turkey with practiced precision, "that we should start a new tradition. Each year, we could add to the family portrait collection, document how we all change and grow." "That's a lovely idea, Mom," Vivian said. "The girls would love that." "We could do it every Thanksgiving," Margaret added. "Make it a real tradition. Blood relatives only, of course," Helena said, not looking at me. "To keep the genealogy consistent." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone at the table knew exactly what she meant, exactly who would be excluded, exactly what message was being sent. But no one said anything. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Vivian suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes. Margaret cleared her throat uncomfortably. The conversation continued around me as if I hadn't heard, as if the words hadn't landed like a slap. Marcus's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly. But he didn't speak up. He never spoke up when it mattered. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "Family traditions are so important. It's lovely that you want to preserve the Hartwell legacy." Helena smiled, pleased with what she interpreted as my agreement. "I'm so glad you understand. Dear, some things are just meant to be kept in the family." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Some things are definitely meant to be kept in the family." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and strained smiles. I played my role perfectly, the accommodating daughter-in-law who understood her place. But inside, something had crystallized. I was done being understanding. I was done being patient. I was done waiting for acceptance that would never come. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I couldn't change Helena's mind about me. I couldn't force my way into their family narrative, but I could stop letting their exclusion define me. I started small. I began taking portrait sessions of my own, not family portraits, but professional headshots. I worked with Sarah, the photographer, who had shot the Hartwell family portrait, to capture images that showed me as I truly was. confident, accomplished, beautiful in my own right. Sarah was enthusiastic about the project. "I've been hoping you'd call," she said when I reached out. "I felt terrible about what happened at that family session. You have such a striking face you'd photograph beautifully." The first session was revealing. Under Sarah's skilled direction, I discovered angles and expressions I'd never noticed before. I learned how to position my shoulders to convey confidence, how to angle my chin to create elegance, how to use my eyes to communicate strength and intelligence. "You're a natural," Sarah said as she reviewed the images on her camera. "Most people are uncomfortable in front of the camera, but you seem to come alive." Looking at the photos, I understood what she meant. In Sarah's portraits, I looked like myself, but a version of myself that was fully realized, completely present, undeniably worthy of attention. These weren't pictures of someone trying to fit into someone else's story. These were pictures of someone writing her own story. I hung these portraits in our home, creating a visual reminder that I existed independently of the Hartwell family. Approval. Marcus was supportive but confused. "They're beautiful, but why the sudden interest in professional photography?" He asked. "I want to document this time in my life," I said, which was true, if incomplete. What I didn't say was that I was creating evidence of my own existence, proof that I was more than just an appendage to his family's story. My art consulting business began to flourish. I'd always been good at what I did, but I'd never pursued it aggressively. I'd been content to work part-time, to be available for family events, to prioritize my role as Marcus's wife over my identity as a professional. But now I threw myself into building something that was entirely mine. I cultivated relationships with collectors, gallery owners, and artists. I spent hours researching market trends, studying auction results, and developing expertise in undervalued artists whose work showed promise. I attended gallery openings, art fairs, and private viewings, building a network of contacts who valued my opinion and sought my advice. The work was intellectually stimulating, in a way that nothing had been for years. I was using skills I'd developed in graduate school, but hadn't fully utilized since my marriage. I was making decisions based on my own judgment, building relationships based on mutual respect, and creating value through my expertise and insight. Within 6 months, I was earning more than I had in my previous best year. Within a year, I was earning significantly more than Marcus. The financial independence was intoxicating, but more important was the professional recognition. I was becoming known in the art world as someone with exceptional taste and market insight. Helena's comments about my unconventional career became less frequent as the reality of my success became impossible to ignore. When people asked about my work at family gatherings, I no longer felt the need to downplay my achievements or apologize for my ambition. I spoke confidently about my projects, my clients, and my expertise. Jess just helped the Maddox family acquire a piece by an emerging artist who's about to have a major museum show. Marcus would say, pride evident in his voice. "She spotted his potential 2 years ago when no one else was paying attention." "How interesting," Helena would reply, her tone neutral but no longer dismissive. Success, I learned, was harder to ignore than talent. But professional success, I discovered, wasn't enough. Every family gathering still featured that portrait, still reminded me of my exclusion. Every holiday card from Helena featured only the blood relatives. Every family milestone was documented without me, as if I were a temporary visitor rather than a permanent member of the family. The portrait had become more than just a photograph. It was a daily reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. It was a symbol of everything I couldn't have, everything I couldn't be, everything I couldn't change about how they saw me. I began to study it with the same intensity I brought to analyzing artwork for my clients. The composition was classical Helena seated regally in the center, her children arranged around her, in a way that suggested both hierarchy and intimacy. The lighting was soft and warm, creating an atmosphere of comfort and belonging. The color palette was muted and sophisticated, speaking to the family's refined taste and understated wealth. But what struck me most was how complete it looked. There was no empty space where another person might fit. No awkward gaps in the composition that suggested someone was missing. The photographer had arranged them perfectly for exactly the people who were meant to be included. Adding anyone else would have disrupted the balance, altered the narrative, changed the story they were telling about themselves. And that, I realized, was the point. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was a statement about identity, about belonging, about who counted and who didn't. It was a visual manifesto of the Hartwell family's values, and those values didn't include me. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I finally understood that my exclusion wasn't personal, it was ideological. Helena didn't dislike me as an individual. She disliked what I represented. Change, outsider influence, the dilution of family traditions. I could be the perfect daughter-in-law, and I would still be excluded because my very existence challenged the family's carefully constructed narrative about itself. This understanding changed my approach to the situation. Instead of trying to earn acceptance, I began to focus on building my own narrative. Instead of waiting for inclusion, I started creating my own space. Instead of seeking their approval, I began to value my own judgment. The real opportunity came 2 years later, when Helena mentioned in passing that she was considering selling the family home. "It's getting too big for me," she said during one of our increasingly rare dinners together. "All these rooms, all this upkeep, Margaret thinks I should move to one of those lovely senior communities." "But Mom," Vivian protested, "that house is our family history. All our memories are there." "I know, darling. But I can't maintain it forever. The property taxes alone are becoming prohibitive. And honestly, the market is so good right now, I could probably get twice what we paid for it." My heart began to race, but I kept my expression neutral. "Are you thinking of listing it soon?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe in the next year or two. I'll need to find the right buyer. Someone who appreciates the history." The house represented everything I'd been excluded from family history. Tradition, belonging, it was the physical manifestation of the Hart legacy, the place where their story had been written and would continue to be told. And Helena was considering selling it. That night, I called my financial advisor. By the next morning, I had a preliminary assessment of my assets. My art consulting business had been more successful than I'd even realized. Between my earnings, my investment portfolio, and the equity in our current home, I had substantial financial resources by the end of the week. I had a mortgage pre-approval for an amount that would cover the purchase of Helena's house with room to spare. By the end of the month, I had a plan. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell anyone. I hired a real estate attorney and began the process of setting up a discreet purchase arrangement. I researched the property value extensively, studying comparable sales in the neighborhood, analyzing market trends, and consulting with real estate professionals about the optimal approach. The house was worth more than Helena realized. The Millbrook Heights neighborhood had gentrified significantly over the past decade, and colonial homes with original architectural details were in high demand. I calculated that I could offer 15% above the current market value and still consider it a sound investment. That this wasn't about money. This was about claiming space that had been denied to me, about writing myself into a story that had excluded me, about transforming rejection into ownership. The approach had to be perfect, too eager, and Helena would suspect something, too casual, and she might not take the offer seriously. I needed to position myself as a helpful intermediary, someone who could connect her with the right buyer while maintaining emotional distance from them. Transaction. I waited for the right moment. The right conversation. It came during a family barbecue that summer. Helena was complaining about the cost of maintaining the large property, the landscaping bills, the roof repairs, the way the property taxes kept increasing with each reassessment. The whole east wing needs new windows, she said, gesturing toward the house with frustration, and the heating system is at least 20 years old. The maintenance costs are becoming astronomical. Have you gotten estimates for the work? Marcus asked. 30,000 for the windows alone. And that's just the beginning. The realtor says buyers today want everything updated: kitchens, bathrooms, flooring. I don't have the energy for that kind of renovation. You know, I said. Carefully. I've been thinking about your situation. If you're seriously considering selling, I might know someone who'd be interested. Helena's eyebrows rose. Really? Who? A client of mine. She's been looking for a property with character. Something with history. She's not looking for a quick flip. She wants to preserve the integrity of the home while making thoughtful updates. That sounds promising. What kind of offer might she make? I named a figure that was 15% above the current market value. Helena's eyes widened. That's quite generous. She's particular about what she wants, and she values homes with family history. She understands that some things are worth paying for. Over the following weeks, I played the role of intermediary between Helena and my fictional client. I had my attorney create a purchasing entity, Hartwell Properties LLC, that would handle the transaction. The name was a small joke, one that only I would understand. The fictional client had a compelling story. She was a successful executive who had grown up in a similar colonial home and wanted to recreate that sense of history and tradition for her own family. She was willing to pay above market value because she understood the intangible value of a home with good bones and family memories. Helena was intrigued. She sounds like exactly the kind of person I want to buy the house. Someone who appreciates what it represents. She does. She's actually asked me to arrange a private viewing before she makes a formal offer. She wants to see the house without the pressure of a typical showing. I arranged for the viewing when Helena was visiting Margaret in the city. I spent 2 hours walking through the house I'd visited countless times as a guest. But this time, I was seeing it as a potential owner. I measured rooms, assessed the condition of systems, and imagined how I would arrange my own furniture in these spaces. The house was even more beautiful than I'd remembered. The original hardwood floors were in excellent condition. The crown molding was intact, and the natural light was spectacular. The kitchen would need updating, and some of the bathrooms were dated, but the bones of the house were solid. Standing in the living room where the portrait hung, I could envision exactly how I would redecorate. I would keep the classical elements that gave the room its character, but I would add touches that reflected my own taste and personality. I would create a space that honored the house's history while making it unmistakably mine. The negotiations were surprisingly smooth. Helena was motivated to sell, and my client was offering above market value with minimal contingencies. I had my attorney handle all the paperwork, maintaining the fiction that I was simply the facilitator of the transaction. Helena was pleased with the terms. Your client seems like a dream buyer. No financing contingencies, flexible closing date, and such a generous offer. I feel like the house is going to someone who really understands its value. She does, I assured her. She's already talking about preserving the original architectural details while making updates that will enhance the home's character. The closing was scheduled for early fall. I had my attorney coordinate all the details while I maintained my role as the helpful intermediary. Helena trusted me to handle the communication with the buyer, which meant I could control the narrative and timeline perfectly. 3 days before the closing, I finally told Marcus, "You bought my mother's house?" He stared at me across our kitchen table, his coffee growing cold in his hands. Yes. Why? Because I could. Because I wanted to. Because it felt right. Jess, this is insane. What are you going to do with it? Live in it. We already have a house. We can sell this one, or keep it as a rental property. I haven't decided yet. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I could see him processing the implications of what I'd done. Does Mom know it's you? She will soon enough. How did you even afford it? My business has been very successful. More successful than I think you realized. But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't we discuss this? Because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it. And because this is something I needed to do for myself. I don't understand. I know you don't, but you will. The closing went smoothly. Helena signed the papers with tears in her eyes, nostalgic about leaving the family home, but excited about her new adventure. She hugged me goodbye and thanked me for connecting her with such a wonderful buyer. I'm so glad it's going to someone who appreciates family history, she said. Your client seems like she'll take good care of it. I'm sure she will, I replied, signing the final documents that transferred ownership of the Hartwell family home to me. I waited 2 weeks before making the reveal. I wanted Helena to be settled in her new senior living community. Wanted the reality of the sale to sink in completely. Then I sent a simple text to the family group chat. Marcus and I are excited to announce that we're moving into the family home. Looking forward to hosting everyone for the holidays. The response was immediate and explosive. Helena called Marcus. Within minutes, demanding to know how this had happened. Vivian sent a series of increasingly frantic messages, asking if this was some kind of joke. Margaret called it manipulative and underhanded. But it was legal, it was final, and it was mine. Marcus fielded the phone calls while I began the process of moving our belongings. I had professional movers handle the heavy furniture, but I personally transported the most important items, my professional portraits, my art collection, my books and personal papers. The first thing I did was redecorate. Not drastically. I wasn't interested in erasing the home's character. But thoughtfully, I removed some of the more oppressive ancestral portraits and replaced them with contemporary pieces from my own collection. I updated the heavy drapes with lighter fabrics that allowed more natural light to filter through the rooms. I rearranged furniture to create more intimate conversation areas while maintaining the formal elegance that gave the house its character. Each change I made was deliberate and respectful of the home's history, while firmly establishing my own aesthetic vision. I kept the elements that made the house special: the original hardwood floors, the crown molding, the built-in bookcases, but I added touches that reflected my personality and taste. Fresh flowers in every room, contemporary sculptures on antique tables, modern lighting fixtures that complemented the classical architecture. The dining room became my favorite space. I kept Helena's mahogany table but replaced her formal china cabinet with a sleek modern sideboard that displayed my collection of contemporary ceramics. The contrast between old and new created a visual dialogue that spoke to both tradition and innovation, history and progress. The kitchen required the most extensive renovation. I hired a designer who specialized in historic homes to create a space that honored the house's colonial origins while incorporating modern functionality. We kept the original brick fireplace and wide plank floors, but added contemporary appliances and fixtures. The result was a kitchen that felt both timeless and thoroughly modern. But the most important change was in the living room, the space where I had been excluded from the family portrait, where I had stood in the doorway watching them create memories without me, where Helena had declared that some things were meant to be kept in the family. This room would become the stage for my final act of transformation. I spent weeks planning the perfect portrait session. I worked with Sarah again, the photographer who had captured the original family portrait. to create something that would serve as both homage and response to the image that had defined my exclusion. I want to use the same lighting setup you used for the Hartwell family portrait, I told her during our planning session. The same angle, the same positioning, the same compositional structure. Sarah understood immediately. You want to reclaim that space, exactly. I want to show what that portrait could have been. What it should have been. We scheduled the session for a Saturday morning when the natural light in the living room would be optimal. I spent days choosing the perfect outfit, a stunning emerald green dress that complemented both my skin tone and the room's color palette. The dress was elegant but not ostentatious, sophisticated but not cold. It was the kind of dress that commanded attention while conveying confidence and grace. The morning of the shoot, I spent extra time on my hair and makeup. I wanted to look flawless, but naturally so. I wanted to embody the kind of effortless elegance that Helena had always possessed, that make it unmistakably my own. Sarah arrived with her equipment and began setting up in the living room. She positioned her lights to recreate the same warm, flattering illumination that had made the original family portrait so appealing. She adjusted the angle of her camera to capture the same perspective, the same relationship between subject and space. The composition is perfect, she said, looking through her viewfinder. You belong in this room, you look like you've always belonged here. The session lasted 2 hours. Sarah captured dozens of images, each one exploring a different aspect of my relationship with the space. In some, I looked directly at the camera with confident authority. In others, I gazed thoughtfully toward the window, as if contemplating the future. In a few, I smiled with genuine warmth, the kind of expression that invited viewers to share. In my contentment, when Sarah showed me the images on her camera, I was stunned. The woman in these photographs was undeniably me, but she was also someone I had never seen before. She was poised, elegant, completely at ease in her surroundings. She looked like someone who had never doubted her right to be exactly where she was. These are extraordinary, Sarah said, scrolling through the images. You've never looked more beautiful, more yourself. I chose 3 images for final processing, but one stood out as perfect. In it, I was seated in the same chair where Helena had positioned herself for the family portrait, but my posture was more relaxed, more natural. The emerald dress created a stunning contrast with the neutral tones of the room, and my expression conveyed both strength and serenity. The portrait was breathtaking. When Sarah delivered the final print, I spent long minutes studying every detail. The image captured not just my physical appearance, but something deeper, a sense of belonging, of rightness, of being exactly where I was meant to be. I had it framed in the same style of ornate gold frame that Helena had chosen for the family portrait. The frame was custom-made to match the original exactly, creating a visual continuity that would make the replacement both obvious and inevitable. The day I hung my portrait in place of the family portrait was both ceremonial and practical. I carefully removed Helena's portrait from its prominent position above the mantelpiece and stored it safely in the library. Then I hung my own portrait in the exact same spot, using the same hardware, the same positioning, the same lighting. The effect was immediate and powerful. My portrait commanded the room in a way that felt both natural and revolutionary. Where the family portrait had been static and formal, mine was dynamic and alive. Where theirs had been about history and tradition, mine was about presence and possibility. I stood back and studied the result. The room looked complete, but different. The portrait didn't just fill the space, it transformed it. This was no longer Helena's living room with my portrait hanging in it. This was my living room, with my portrait presiding over it. The first family gathering in the new arrangement was scheduled for Thanksgiving. I sent the invitations myself, from my new address, in my new capacity as hostess. I planned the menu, coordinated the logistics, and prepared to welcome the family that had never quite welcomed me. Helena was among the first to arrive. She stood in the doorway of what had been her living room for 30 years, taking in the changes I had made. Her eyes moved systematically around the room, noting the new artwork, the updated furniture arrangements, the fresh flowers. But inevitably, her gaze came to rest on the portrait above the mantelpiece. She stared at it for a long moment without speaking. I watched her face, trying to read her expression. There was surprise, certainly, and perhaps a touch of admiration. But there was also something else, a kind of recognition, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied. I wanted something that would complement the room. "It does. It's perfect for the space." The other family members arrived in stages, each reaction to the portrait more satisfying than the last. Vivian stopped mid-sentence when she saw it, her mouth forming a small O of surprise. Margaret paused in the doorway, her usual composed expression flickering with something that might have been respect. The children were the most honest in their reactions. Rebecca, now 14, studied the portrait with the serious attention she usually reserved for art class assignments. "It's really good," she said. "You look like you're in charge of everything." "Do I?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Yeah, like you're the one who decides what happens in this room." The adults seemed less comfortable with the portrait's presence. Throughout the afternoon, I noticed them glancing at it repeatedly, as if trying to reconcile the image with their preconceptions about me. I had never been the center of attention in this family, never been the focal point of their gatherings. Now, literally and figuratively, I was impossible to ignore. Dinner was served in the dining room, but everyone gravitated back to the living room afterward. The portrait dominated the space, drawing attention and comment from everyone who entered. Some of the feedback was complimentary. "What a lovely portrait. You look stunning. The artist captured you perfectly." But I could sense the underlying discomfort, the subtle recognition that something fundamental had shifted. Marcus seemed torn between pride and unease. He complimented the portrait enthusiastically, but I could see him watching his family's reactions, trying to gauge their comfort level with the change. He had supported my decision to buy the house, but I think he was only beginning to understand the full implications of what I had done. "It's just so strange," Vivian whispered to Margaret when she thought I couldn't hear, "seeing her up there instead of us." "It's her house now," Margaret replied. "She can hang whatever she wants, but it feels like she's erasing us somehow. Maybe we erased her first." The conversation was brief, but it revealed the family's struggle to process what they were seeing. For decades, Helena's portrait had been the visual anchor of this room, the image that established the family's identity and values. Now my portrait occupied that space, and with it, I had claimed not just physical territory but psychological prominence. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying the family dynamics with new eyes. From my position as hostess, I could observe the subtle hierarchies, the unspoken tensions, the ways in which power and attention moved through the group. I was no longer on the periphery of these interactions. I was at their center. Helena approached me privately as the evening was winding down. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" "For the portrait, for excluding you. It was wrong." I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse. There was something different in her expression, a kind of vulnerability I had never seen before. "Why did you do it?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing Marcus, of losing control of my family. You came in and you were so capable, so independent. I felt like you were taking my place." "I never wanted to take your place. I just wanted to have my own place." "I know that now. But then?" I saw you as a threat instead of a gift. We stood in silence. Two women who had spent years circling each other warily, finally speaking the truth. The portrait, Helena said, gesturing toward the mantelpiece. It's perfect, you look like you belong here. I do belong here, I said. I always did. The months that followed brought a new dynamic to the family, Helena, perhaps chastened by the reality of her changed circumstances, began making genuine efforts to connect with me. She asked about my work, my interests, my background. She started calling me directly instead of going through Marcus. She even suggested that we plan some family events together, combining her experience with my fresh perspective. The portrait became a conversation starter, rather than a source of tension. Visitors to the house invariably commented on it, and I found myself telling the story of its creation with increasing confidence. I spoke about the decision to commission it, the experience of working with Sarah, the symbolic importance of claiming that space. Some people understood the deeper meaning immediately, others needed it explained, but everyone who saw it recognized that it was more than just a beautiful photograph. It was a statement about identity, belonging, and the power of refusing to be invisible. My business continued to flourish. The confidence I had gained from the portrait experience translated into professional success. I was more assertive in negotiations, more willing to trust my instincts, more comfortable positioning myself as an expert rather than a facilitator. I began teaching workshops on art appreciation and collecting, sharing my knowledge with others who wanted to develop their visual literacy. I was invited to speak at gallery openings and art fairs, recognized as someone with both expertise and the ability to communicate complex ideas clearly. The financial success was gratifying, but more important was the professional recognition. I was becoming known in the art world as someone with exceptional taste and market insight. Gallery owners sought my opinion on emerging artists. Collectors trusted my recommendations. Museum curators valued my perspective on contemporary trends. But the most satisfying aspect of my success was how it changed the family's perception of me. Helena no longer made dismissive comments about my unconventional career. Instead, she began introducing me to her friends as my daughter-in-law, the art consultant. She has such an eye for talent. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I carried myself differently, spoke with more authority, took up space in conversations that I had previously navigated carefully. I was no longer the daughter-in-law who needed to prove herself worthy of inclusion. I was the successful professional who had chosen to join their family. The portrait played a crucial role in this transformation. Every morning I would see it as I came downstairs, a daily reminder of what I had accomplished. Every evening, I would glance at it as I moved through the living room, a constant affirmation of my right to be exactly where I was. Visitors to the house often remarked on how perfectly the portrait fit the space, how natural it looked in that prominent position. Some people assumed it had always been there, that it was part of the house's original decoration. The portrait had become so integrated into the room's aesthetic that it was impossible to imagine the space without it. Helena began bringing friends to see the house, giving informal tours that highlighted both its historical features and my thoughtful updates. She always paused at the portrait, praising both the artistic quality and the way it enhanced the room's elegance. "Jess has such impeccable taste," she would say. "She's preserved everything that makes this house special, while adding her own beautiful touches." The woman who had once excluded me from the family portrait was now using my portrait as evidence of my belonging, my contribution to the family's story. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I had moved beyond the need for vindication. I was focused on the future, not the past. Marcus and I began hosting regular dinner parties using the house's formal dining room and spacious living room to entertain friends and colleagues. The portrait became a natural conversation piece, prompting discussions about art, family, and the meaning of home. I loved these gatherings. Loved the way the house came alive with conversation and laughter. I loved being the hostess, the one who welcomed people into this beautiful space and made them feel at home. I loved the way the portrait presided over these events, a constant reminder of the journey that had brought me to this place. One particularly memorable evening, we hosted a dinner party for several prominent collectors and gallery owners. The conversation was lively and intellectually stimulating, ranging from contemporary art trends to the importance of supporting emerging artists. As the evening wound down, one of the collectors, a sophisticated woman named Catherine, approached me privately. "I have to ask about the portrait," she said. "It's exquisite. Who's the artist?" I told her about Sarah, about the collaborative process we had used to create the image. "But it's more than just a beautiful photograph," Catherine continued. "There's a story there, isn't there? A deeper meaning?" I smiled. "There's always a deeper meaning. Would you be willing to share it?" I looked around the room, at the guests who were lingering over wine and conversation, at the portrait that watched over all of us, at the space that had become so completely mine. "It's about claiming your place," I said. "About refusing to be invisible. About understanding that sometimes the most powerful response to exclusion is to create your own inclusion." Catherine nodded slowly. "I can see that. You look like someone who knows exactly where she belongs." "I do," I said. "I always did it. Just took me a while to understand it." The evening ended with promises to stay in touch, to continue the conversations we had started, to collaborate on future projects. As I said goodbye to the last guest, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond the success of the party itself. This was what I had been working toward all along, not just acceptance from Marcus's family, but the creation of my own space, my own community, my own version of belonging. The portrait had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had been internal. I had stopped waiting for other people to recognize my worth, and had begun to assert it myself. I had stopped trying to fit into their story, and had started writing my own. I had stopped being invisible and had become impossible to ignore. The portrait still hangs in the living room, presiding over family gatherings and dinner parties, watching over conversations and celebrations. It has become such an integral part of the room that I sometimes forget it's there, until someone new sees it and comments on its beauty, or asks about its significance. When that happens, I tell them the story, not the whole story, but the essential parts. I tell them about the importance of claiming your space, about the power of refusing to be erased, about the courage it takes to hang your own portrait in the place where you were once excluded. Some people understand immediately. Others need time to process the implications. But everyone who hears the story recognizes that it's about more than just a portrait. It's about transformation, about the journey from invisibility to prominence, about the decision to stop waiting for acceptance and start demanding it. Hartwell family portrait, the one that excluded me, sits carefully preserved in the library. I didn't destroy it or hide it away in the attic. It's part of the house's history, part of the family's story, part of the journey that led me to this moment. Sometimes Helena asks about it, wonders if I might consider displaying it somewhere in the house. I always tell her that it's perfectly safe where it is, that it's being preserved for future generations. What I don't tell her is that I keep it as a reminder not of the hurt it caused, but of the strength it revealed. That portrait showed me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. It taught me that acceptance couldn't be earned through accommodation or kindness or patience. It forced me to confront the reality that I would never belong in their version of the family story. But it also inspired me to write my own story, to create my own narrative, to build my own version of belonging. It pushed me to become the person I am today, confident, successful, impossible to ignore. The woman in my portrait isn't the woman who was excluded from the family photograph. She's the woman who emerged from that exclusion, who transformed rejection into opportunity, who turned invisibility into prominence. She's the woman who bought the house, commissioned the portrait, and hung it in the place where she always belonged. Looking at that portrait now, I see everything I've accomplished and everything I've become. I see the successful businesswoman, the gracious hostess, the valued family member, the person who refused to be diminished by other people's limitations. But most importantly, I see someone who understands her own worth, who claims her own space, who writes her own story. I see someone who learned that the most powerful revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about becoming so undeniably yourself that they can't pretend you don't exist. The portrait hangs there still, in the home that is now mine, watching over the family that finally learned to see me. And every time I look at it, I remember the lesson that changed everything. Sometimes the best way to join the picture is to paint your own. My mother-in-law thought she could exclude me from the family portrait and erase me from their legacy. Instead, she gave me the motivation to create my own legacy, one that turned out to be far more powerful than anything she could have imagined. She wanted to keep some things in the family. Now I am the family. I am the matriarch of this house, the keeper of its traditions, the one who decides who belongs and who doesn't. I am the woman in the portrait, presiding over the living room where I was once unwelcome, claiming the space that was always rightfully mine. The portrait isn't just a photograph, it's a declaration. It says that I am here, that I matter, that I belong. It says that I refuse to be invisible, that I will not be erased, that I will take up space in this world whether others make room for me or not. Every morning when I come downstairs, I see my face looking back at me from that golden frame. Every evening when I turn off the lights, I leave my portrait watching over the room. Every time we host a gathering, my image presides over the festivities. I am no longer the daughter-in-law trying to earn her place. I am the woman who claimed her place, who created her own belonging, who transformed exclusion into ownership. I am the woman who understood that the most elegant revenge is not to destroy what excludes you, but to become what cannot be excluded. The portrait will hang there long after I'm gone, a permanent reminder of the woman who refused to be invisible. Future generations will see it and know that Jess Hartwell lived here, that she mattered, that she belonged. They will know that she was the woman who turned rejection into revolution, who transformed hurt into power, who proved that sometimes the most devastating response to being left out of the picture is to create your own frame. Like this story from Revenge Treats. The sweetest revenge is often the most patient one. Sometimes it's not about getting even. It's about getting ahead, about becoming so successful that your exclusion becomes their loss. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Remember, you don't need their portrait to validate your existence. You don't need their acceptance to know your worth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is hang your own portrait and let it speak for itself.